This intro could use a little more pizzazz. Yeah, there we go. Greetings, fellow conquerors. This is darkfireslide, and welcome to a video where I'm going to be talking about Cradle of Civilization, the newest EU4 DLC, and talking about the features that it brings to the table and whether or not it's worth your money. So without further ado, let's begin and start talking about a breakdown of all the different features that this new DLC adds. First, we have new governments for mostly Middle Eastern countries, featuring unique mechanics specifically for the Egyptian Mamluk government, the Persian theocracy if you manage to form Persia, tribal federations for many of the nations around the Ottomans, and all of the heirs of Timur also get unique mechanics, namely in the form of events. Another feature that this brings to the table is the ability for merchants to do special missions. Islamic schools add different events and things that can happen to the Islamic religion over the course of the game, including the introduction of many schools of Islam that can bring different bonuses to your country if you are friendly with a nation, a certain nation, who can bring you a scholar from that nation. The expansion also adds in Army Professionalism, which is a new mechanic, not at all dissimilar to things like experience in Hearts of Iron 4, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we can also do a thing called exploiting development, where we basically burn a development in one of our provinces, and we get an immediate gain at the cost of obviously losing that development. So if you need emergency funds or manpower, you can essentially loot your own country to get something back immediately. There are also special events for pretty much every Muslim country added to the game, and each government type basically gets 3 shiny new buttons to do different things with. So, for example, as an ICTA, or an emirate, we can do efficient tax farming, which gives us a 15% national tax modifier bonus for 20 years. We get land acquisition, which reduces core creation cost for 20 years. And we can also get lenient taxation, which increases our diplomatic reputation by 1 and reduces our liberty desire in our subjects by 15% for 20 years. And there are also a bunch of other smaller minor changes, one of the most notable being that you can now use missionaries to convert provinces in your subjects' nations. This is very useful if you are looking to make a vassal, like, force religion, since you can actually now actively change their religion. Alright, now the hot button feature, the one that's going to sort of be prevalent in every game, is the new Army Professionalism mechanic that is added in Cradle of Civilization. This is kind of the selling point of the whole DLC to me, and so we're going to talk about it for a minute. Not as in-depth as somebody else who's done a video on this, namely Reman's Paradox, who I will link in the pinned comment. I will link to his video where he talks in depth about Army Professionalism, whether or not it's a good thing or not, because I think that Army Professionalism is more or less the biggest reason why you would get this if you don't play in the Middle East. If you play in the Middle East, this is a very good DLC. If you don't, then this is about the only thing that you're going to get out of this DLC, apart from the missionaries converting in your vassals' provinces as well, and the merchants. Don't forget the merchants. Anyway, so what does Army Professionalism do? Well, basically, it's a measure of how much your army relies on mercenaries versus how much it has a standing army, so to speak. And as we can see, pretty much everything in this group affects your military in some way. And more or less how it works is the closer to 0% your professionalism is, the cheaper and more available your mercenaries are. But the more professionalism that you have, you get more siege ability, land fire damage, and shock damage, which is pretty good. Now, the other thing that they added into the game is the ability to drill your troops. Now, again, Reman's Paradox does a much better job of doing this, but basically, this looks really nice on paper, but is more or less just a superfluous way to spend money and resources into giving you a small bonus. Now, for those of you who like to say, I know there are a lot of people who like to have their Prussian Space Marines. This is certainly going to add to that, just because a fully drilled regiment is going to have essentially 10% additional discipline until those troops start dying off and until that drill percentage starts to go away. But when professionalism is maxed out, it is essentially the same as having an additional 10% combat ability to all of your troops across all phases. So, all phases of combat, I should say. So it's pretty good, and in addition to these bonuses, we get all these other bonuses like the ability to build supply depots, which can increase supply limit. You can refill garrisons. You can regain manpower at 60%. You can regain your manpower when you disband regiments, which is very nice. At 80%, general cost is reduced by 50%, which is pretty nice, even though you would kind of want this beforehand, since one of the ways you can improve professionalism is by recruiting a general, which gives you 1% professionalism per general recruited. And then finally, at 100% professionalism, it reduced morale damage by reserves happens, and basically in Reman's video he talks about how this is kind of useless, but and then army drill increases at double the rate, basically. So it's pretty good, and the nice thing about professionalism is it doesn't decay. So it goes up very slowly, but once you have it, it's pretty hard to lose it unless you're spamming lots and lots of mercenaries. And so that's kind of the gist of the DLC. That's really all there is to it. There's a bunch of new fancy things for Muslim countries to do, a lot of fun things that you can do with interactions involving... Oh, as well, one thing I completely forgot to mention is that piety was sort of changed. Now, instead of piety and no piety, we have mysticism, which is, oddly enough, what used to be the high piety, and now we have legalism on the other side, which is sort of our lack of piety from before. So they kind of flip places, but now once you get to 75 of either mysticism or legalism, you can enact a special event. With mysticism, you can get 4,500 manpower, and at 75 of your piety, you can reduce corruption by 2 with the click of a button. I don't know what the cooldowns on those are because I haven't had a chance to use them yet, but they do seem pretty useful and just nice to have. And it's really nice to see that the Muslim religion finally has gotten some attention after all these years. But anyway, let's talk about whether or not I think this DLC is worth it, and that is kind of a difficult question to answer, because this is going to run you about $20, and to me, basically it comes down to whether or not you enjoy playing literally any country that is Muslim, and there are a lot of them. So if you only like to play inside of Europe, the only reason you would really get this DLC is for Army Professionalism, the Missionaries, and Merchants. But if you occasionally play a Muslim nation and you would like to have a little bit more of an interesting experience, this is definitely going to add that for you. And literally every single country around this area just has gotten so much attention. And this isn't even what it looks like at the start of the game. There are so many nations at the start of the game now in this area. And, oh, very sad. Genoa owns Constantinople. I just noticed. But anyway, yeah, my recommendation to you on whether or not you should get this DLC is predicated a lot on whether or not you play Muslim nations ever. Even the Ottomans get a lot out of this DLC. So if you're looking to have a more interesting Muslim experience, if you've never played a Muslim country and you would like to have an experience as unique as something like the Mandate of Heaven in Asia or the HRE, while this isn't an identical experience to those by any stretch of the imagination, and I think that's a good thing, this is going to add a lot of value, I think, just based on that. Apart from that, like I said, the only thing that this really adds is the Army Professionalism and the Merchants. Anyway, that is my summary on whether or not I think you should buy Cradle of Civilization. Again, it will run you about $20 if you decide to purchase it, and because it's new, it will likely not get discounted this year in the Steam sale. Now, I don't consider this to be a necessary DLC. If you're looking to get a DLC, and you already have the essentials being Art of War, Common Sense, and some people would argue the Cossacks. I wouldn't argue that, personally. Not to cast shade, of course. You could also look into getting Rights of Man as probably a more a more betterer option. Yeah, let's go with more betterer. That's the most eloquent thing I can say there. At any rate, thank you for joining me. I hope this video was educational, informative, and helpful to you in deciding whether or not you want to get the new DLC. And let me know what kind of videos you guys would like to see in the future. This has been darkfireslide, and I'll see you on the next one.